and welcome to the podcast Connected, Curious, Care. My name is Karina and I'm really happy to have you here today when we talk about something so simple than listening. And I'm a big fan of listening. I find it fascinating. And maybe that's also because when I start my communication trainings at the beginning, I usually ask the participants, what do you want to take away from this? Like, what is your skill you would love to work on and build? And there are things coming up like I want to be confident going into conflict conversations. I want to be able to have difficult conversations. It's a lot about expressing and not so much about listening. There are not a lot of people that come to me and are like, hey Karina, I really need to learn how to listen. And I think it's coming from this notion that we think we all can listen. We do it all the time. There's nothing to it. We just sit and listen. And there's quite some more to it. And I would love to just dive into it today of what good listening looks like. And I'll start by just telling you what I mean when I say listening. Listening to me means that I fully focus and understand a person I'm talking to. And I have an understanding not only about the words this person is using and saying, I don't just listen with my ears, but I also, through the body language and through the tone of the voice, I get a sense of the feelings that are in play, of potential underlying needs that are in play. And this is super important. In communication, it's really not just about listening to others. It has to start by listening to us as well, to ourselves, and to understand when we go into a conversation or are in a conversation, what is happening right now with me? Like, what are these feelings coming up, and what are the underlying needs that I have? And then to really be able to make a decision and say, okay, I'm ready to listen, or I might not be ready to listen, but to have that power to find the moments when we are able to listen. Okay. The benefits for listening and fully understanding another person are that it's easier to really meet another person and to connect and stay connected, even if we disagree. And especially when we are in a conflict situation, if we first fully listen and understand another person, it's so much more likely that the other person is willing to listen to us and hear our concerns and our thoughts, instead of starting to get into this cycle of, it's almost like a match where one argument hits the other and one judgment is followed by some guilt and blame, and it's not something where we usually find a resolution. And so that's why if we first listen, we are more likely to be listened to and have a common ground and a common understanding of a situation. Okay. Now, as easy as it all sounds, there are some barriers that make it hard for us to listen. And especially like for health professionals, we operate not in a vacuum. And so I want to mention some of the barriers to this deep listening, that we can manage our expectations and have a realistic understanding when there might be times when this deep listening is possible, and when we may have to say, I would love to talk to you more about that. I would love to understand you more. Right now, let's focus on the emergency at hand and then sit down, okay? But so one of the barriers that as a health professional is if you are in a noisy or in a busy environment, and that makes it hard to really focus on the other person and bring your attention to the other person. And if it's an emergency situation, it's not it's not possible that we not focus on the patient while we try to understand why our colleague feels a certain way or has a need a certain way, right? And so, but being aware of that and then scheduling time later is helpful. Or if a relative, if a wife comes with her husband to a stroke unit and the husband gets through the diagnostics and the wife comes and is like, oh, I'm so concerned about my husband. Can you tell me what's going on? And I want to talk. And it's better to then just be upfront and clear and be like, I wish I would have the time to sit down with you and talk. Right now I don't. And you can best help your husband right now and me if you have a seat, and we're gonna come to you as soon as we know more. Or give her something to do if there is something to do. Like, would you be willing to go to administration and fill out some paperwork or whatever it is? But to just be clear if there is no time for more listening and a fuller understanding at that moment. Then what can also be limiting to listening is if we operate in strict hierarchical structures. And it might be different now at different places. I'm just telling you from my own experience when I was a nurse. My first couple of months, I was quite shocked at how hierarchical the hospital is, especially for a nurse student starting her career and coming into the business. And I'm afraid that in those systems, we tend to listen more and give more attention to people higher up the hierarchy ladder, and it's not as inviting to listen to all the voices in the room. And something else might happen if I work in a very hierarchical environment where I don't feel like the leadership may support others to speak up, or an environment where it's okay to be open and curious and vulnerable, then I might tend to, instead of listening, to defend myself or to justify something or to blame something or somebody else. And so just being aware that there are systems that make it harder to listen to certain situations or in certain moments is good to be aware of. Then distractions can happen anytime and anywhere. I can plan the most quiet and best meeting to have a conversation, and I can be distracted by looking at the dress of the other person and thinking about how beautiful the dress is. Or I could smell something and get off track, or I could see the food coming to the ward and thinking about, oh my gosh, I have to deliver the food to the different rooms. So the distractions are just, they will happen. And what helps me to become faster aware of them is if I go into a conversation with the mind, with mindfulness, and with the goal to be present in the moment and to focus on my breath, and to then catch myself faster if I'm distracted or if my head movie jumps on into gear, which happens a lot. Like I might start talking with someone and I'm fully there, and suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, did I close the door of the storage room? Or did I finish all of the medications that I wanted to do today to prepare them for the next shift? Or I might find myself thinking about what I would like to do next, what's on my task list. And again, being present helps to regulate the thoughts and getting off track and just coming back to the moment. And then something else that influences us, all of us, are our prejudice. So I may come to a conversation and may have a harder time being open and coming with curiosity if I have a past with that person, if there's something that already happened where I feel like I already know what happened here and today, or if I talk to someone of a certain culture or religious group, or somebody that is a political supporter of somebody, where I feel like, oh, you don't have to say anything, I know already, right? And so that keeps us then from really listening and trying to understand the other person in the situation. Then analyzing, if I jump to like making conclusions on my own, instead of really objectively listen to what the other person brings to me. Okay, then if I come into a conversation and I already feel like I know the goal of this conversation, I know where this conversation has to go, then it's gonna be hard to really listen, because everything the other person is gonna say, I will experience as like getting me away from that goal. And so if there is room for finding a compromise, try to be flexible and not come into a conversation with these outcomes that you set, but be open and curious to really find a compromise. And if that's not possible, let's say you are in a leading position and you are implementing a new workflow or a new regulations and a new regulation, and there is no room for compromises, then just be clear with it that this is a demand, and that this is how it's going to be implemented. If there is some time for giving feedback, this is how it's going to look like. But right now, these are the expectations. And then the last one, and this is the most important for me, that can get in the way, which is our own feelings and our own needs. We don't always have the space to listen to someone else. And it's so important that we are aware of where we are at and if we are able to listen. And only when I'm willing and able to know about my feelings and needs, and then to park them on the side and be like, okay, I know about that. I don't have to agree, but I have to and I want to understand where the other person is coming from. And so check in with yourself, and this is now moving into like, how do we listen? Check in with yourself as a first thing. Are you able to listen at that moment? And if